Hey guys, in this video I'm going to talk about the creative process. So I'm Daniel Norton, photographer here in New York. I make videos like this one. It's going to be about kind of philosophy, I guess, about business, about gear, about technique. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, go ahead and subscribe, and let's get to it. So I've been asked this a lot, possibly because I think I did a live stream where I labeled it that I was going to do some creative building up, and then I didn't because, which I'll talk about in a second, because everybody started talking to me, and then that distracted me because I'm easily distracted. But what's funny is that actually did lead to me coming up with some good ideas. But let's just talk about this for a second. So what is the creative process? Like, how do we come up with ideas for shoots? And I'm going to walk through kind of mine. I'll maybe talk about some other kind of generic tips that could be good for anybody. In the end, everybody has their own process. You know, everybody is going to think of or be inspired by different things, depending on their background, depending on what's going on in their life, depending on, you know, that kind of stuff. But I want to start this though by I'm going to try to tell this story that I'm not going to tell the whole story, but it's a great story from John Prine, who was a amazing songwriter, singer, or whatever. And in one of his live records, he's talking about the song. He's doing the introduction of how he wrote the song with this other person, and he makes this comment where he says, "Oh yeah, you know, we decided that we were going to write it, you know, get together at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning and write it like the professionals do." And I always just found that to be funny, you know, because yeah, I mean, if you do a creative job for a living, you do have to actually do it kind of on schedule. But at the same time, when he talks about the rest of the story, the whole inspiration and everything came from something completely different. And then when they sat down to write the song, he already basically had the thing. And I think that's actually, to me as a creative, like I saw that. You know, maybe somebody listening to this in general might not pick that up like I did, or maybe I'm crazy, right? But it was just kind of interesting because ultimately they were planning to write the song at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday like the professionals. But then when he was traveling over the weekend, he was reading a newspaper, and that's what gave him the idea for the song. I mean, clearly they actually wrote it together, but like that gave because really the spark of creativity is the important part. Most of us that do this, right? So you guys, photographers, me, you know, once you get rolling, it's a lot easier. The hardest part is that snap, to break past that. Once you get past that, it's usually a lot easier, right? So that's that first step. So coming up with ideas, right? So this is what we're going to talk about here. Now, for me, I do it a bunch of different ways. So what's interesting, and what I was going to do when we did the live stream, maybe I will do it again, is I will sometimes look for things that are trending. Because now I'm talking about ideas for videos, so it's maybe a little different than if you're shooting for shooting. I did just make a video where I was like, don't just do things that trend. But it's good to know that. You know, it's good to know what's going on in the world. And right now, you know, with COVID so much wreaking havoc in the U.S., I'm not out as much, you know. So when I was in the position to be out, I would often take like walks through the city and like sit in a park, let's say, and just watch things go on. You can see trends that way, right? You see how people dress, you see how they interact with each other, you hear music that they're listening to, and you can pick up on what is going on, and that can help you. Because trends in life are trends in photography or trends in art, you know. We are part of life, right? It's something that we do, right? So it's not like it's separate. Trends in photography, specifically about gear and technique, are also super interesting because if people are doing, from my point of view, because I'm trying to create videos, right? So my goal is to create videos for you. You're probably sitting there watching, you know, photo shoots or looking at images and going, wow, I'd like to be able to do that, or I'm curious how they do that, and I don't quite comprehend. So from my point of view, I want to know what questions you guys might have, right? So I look for what's trending for that reason and try to actually find it. My phone is jiggling, I'll put it over here. And I'll try to find it kind of before you do it, in a sense. Like, I'll start looking for the trends, right? I'll go onto Instagram, I'll go onto, you know, Flickr, or just do general Google image searches. And I won't look for the words like photography trends, because that's not going to find you anything. What I will look for is things like portrait photography, fashion photography, you know, art photography, or just something like portrait, or, you know, or things like spring fashions, or, although it's summer now, so it'd be fall fashion. Fall fashions, winter fashions. I'll look for these types of words. And what we'll see is we'll start to see, and I'll do a Google image search, obviously. And we start to look for these things, and that helps us find images that start to inspire us, right? So we look and we're like, oh, look, the fall fashion, I'm super generic, is browns. Of course, right, everybody was brown. This is interesting, right? So now I can start to think about color palettes that I might want to use in my work, because coming up into this thing, people are going to start having that. Everywhere you look is going to be these color palettes. And if you are finding that ahead of time, you will actually be ahead of the curve. So, and this comes from my background as a fashion photographer. You're basically wanting to figure out what it is people are going to be talking about before they're talking about it. You want to look at the newest music that's coming out. Every time that, I have Amazon Music and Apple Music, and whenever they have a new, artist spotlight or whatever, I listen to it. I'm not necessarily like all the music, but it's cool to know what's going on, right? What people are talking about, what's happening, what people are wearing. This is how I get inspired, because people inspire me because I am a people photographer, right? So what I'll do is I will actually just start looking at things. Now, for me personally, very rarely do I look at it like, fall fashion, and I see an image and I'm like, oh, I want to do that. But usually what happens is it starts to get me in the right mood. So during that process, I'm usually not actually writing notes or copying pictures or doing it. I'm just looking. Then I'll usually walk away from it and sit down with my cup of coffee and my phone, because that's where I use my notepad, and I will just start brainstorming based on what's now currently in my head. Essentially, I'm setting a mood, right? If you listen to, let's say music with a fast beat, it puts you in a mood like this, right? If you listen to the sad music, you may, so the same thing. I'm going to look at images. I'm going to look at what's going on to get me in the mood to create, because now all these thoughts are in my head, Sometimes too, I'll be reading a book, and then I'll stop and do it then, because obviously I'll forget otherwise. But or even watching a movie, right? I'll get to those in a second. This is like more forced, what I'm talking about right now. I'm forcing the creative process. So we have a wealth in front of us, right? We have the internet, which means we can look at anything. So put in words that are interesting to you. Maybe you have a red filter that you just bought for your lens. Just Google the word red, or red images, or red clothing, or red whatever, or red whatever, and see what comes up. I don't even know what will come up. I didn't do it, but this is basically what we can do, right? See what is happening that's related to the thing that we want to bring forward, right? Now, that's like when I'm going to sit down and do my 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning to write a song. Most of the time, it comes a different way, and it also goes into this story. I will see if I can find this video of this, or audio of the thing I'm talking about, so you can listen to it. So in the John Prine story, he's reading the National Enquirer, and this is where he finds this thing. So that's really where most of it comes from. When you are doing certain tasks that open your mind, so I find reading, and I've talked about this before in videos, I find reading and listening to music to be much more powerful than, let's say, looking at images or watching TV or movies. And I'll talk about watching TV and movies in a second, but the reason for that is because when you hear a song lyric, right, or you read a passage in a book, you imagine in your head what that looks like. There's nothing there to tell you what it looks like except those words. And words are just ideas, right? And the ideas come into our brain. And with that, you imagine. And you can solidify that image that comes into your brain when you read it. And when you do that, that becomes the idea for your lighting, or your mood anyways. And you can make notes of this. And when you do that, then when you go to light something, you can bring back that emotion that you had in your head. And it's very powerful. Now, on the other end, and maybe that's a little harder too, especially if you're really new to lighting, because you might not really understand what you're capable of with the tools you have. So another thing that can work well is if you do watch TVs or movies, to really pay attention to the light. Really watch it. and this is much more, and I'm not making some kind of a judgment on people that like CGI movies, but this is much more effective in movies that don't use a lot of CGI. So usually not horror movies or space, action movies, although some of them use practical effects, because you can actually see how light really falls. It's actually a great documentary about the making of the Dark Crystal series that was, I think it was on Netflix. And they talk about why they were going to CGI it, and then they used puppets instead because of the way light actually falls on real things. It just has a different sense, right? And it's true to me. So when you're watching a movie and you're looking at like this scene where they go, through this restaurant or whatever, look at how the light falls on people. Look at how it feels. Now, I will say this: lighting for film is much different in a lot of ways than lighting for photography. They use a lot more hard light. It's generally not as flattering as stills lighting. In general, that doesn't mean you can't use it, of course. And I love using hard light. That's very cinematic. But you got to translate that stuff a little bit into your stills world, typically to be more palatable to a stills audience. So you're going to look at that scene. You're going to get a feeling of the color, the direction of the light, how they use light, the sources of light, and then you'll kind of temper it to your style. Soften it up if that's more your style, or whatever. And again, keep these things. Maybe screenshot it if you want. Here it's good to have a visual representation because there is a visual representation. So maybe you're going to screenshot it, to keep that. Maybe you're just going to make a note. Maybe you'll draw a picture. But what you ultimately want to do is think about the light and think about the scene that they're using the light in and what they're trying to convey in that scene. Because if they did their job well and it works together, that's what you want, right? Because you're basically doing a scene but removing the dialogue. So look at the scene where it's romantic and see how the light falls. And then when you want to create a more romantic light, you have that as your base. So these things will just help you get further and further into your creative process. There's lots of different ways to do it. You can like, there's exercises people do where like you flip to a random page in a book and read the 13th word, and that's cool too. But I like it to come a little bit more naturally to me. So I think the best tip I can give about having a creative process and being creative is to always be open to it. Be open to it coming at any time, from any place, and accept it and make sure you recognize it. That's the hard part. Recognize that you're becoming inspired, and then make notes so that you can bring that back later. Whether it be mental notes or physical notes or whatever you do, make those notes for yourself so you can come back and bring that inspiration back when you reach the set. So let me know how you guys do this. Like I said, I'm really curious because I think the creative process is one of the biggest topics that we could talk about because there's so many different ways, and I only really brushed on some of the things I do. So if you want to see more videos like this too, let me know. But in want to see more videos, period, go ahead and subscribe and ring the bell so you get the notifications, and I'll see you next time.